Every single week, the average American homeowner bags up somewhere between 2 and 4 pounds of nutrient-dense, biologically active material and drags it to the curb for the garbage truck. It is a substance that agronomists have measured to contain meaningful concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the exact 3 elements that the $47 billion lawn care industry sells back to those same homeowners in plastic jugs for $30 a bag. The material is grass clippings, and the decision to throw them away is not just wasteful. It is, by any honest agronomic calculation, one of the most expensive habits in American suburban life. Yet right now, across a country where the average homeowner spends over $1,000 a year maintaining their lawn, the majority of those homeowners are bagging their clippings, paying to have them hauled away, and then driving to a garden center to buy a synthetic replacement for the exact nutrients they just discarded. So why does this happen? How did we get here? And more importantly, what is the actual science behind what grass clippings can do for your lawn? Let's find out. To understand why this technology was abandoned, you have to understand the system that replaced it. For the first half of the 20th century, leaving clippings on a lawn was not a philosophical choice. It was simply what everyone did. The lawn mower was a mechanical tool. The clippings fell where they fell, and the soil beneath absorbed them, broke them down, and returned their nutrients to the root zone in a continuous cycle. This is what ecologists call a closed nutrient loop, and it is the same mechanism that has sustained every grassland ecosystem on Earth for millions of years without any external fertilizer inputs whatsoever. The disruption came after the Second World War. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, developed from the Haber-Bosch process that had originally been used to manufacture munitions, became suddenly and abundantly cheap. The American chemical industry, needing a peacetime market for its production capacity, turned to agriculture and then to the suburban lawn. By the 1950s, the marketing of synthetic lawn fertilizers had become a fixture of American consumer culture. And with fertilizer now available in a bag at the hardware store, the idea that your lawn could feed itself began to seem old-fashioned, even primitive. The bag and dispose model followed naturally. If nutrients came from a bag, why bother leaving the clippings? They were, the new consensus suggested, just mess to be cleaned up. And that consensus has persisted, largely unchallenged, for 70 years. But the science has never supported it. Here is what is actually inside a bag of grass clippings. Fresh grass clippings are approximately 80% water by weight, but the dry matter that remains contains between 3 and 6% nitrogen by dry weight, depending on the species, the season, and the management regime. They contain somewhere between 0.5 and 1% phosphorus, and between 1.5 and 3.5% potassium. This is not a trace amount. This is a fertilizer profile competitive with many commercially sold lawn products. The University of Minnesota Extension calculated that returning clippings to the lawn over the course of a full growing season provides the equivalent of approximately 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of lawn per month of active growth. For a standard 5,000 square foot American lawn, that is the equivalent of between 3 and 4 pounds of actual nitrogen returned to the soil annually. At commercial nitrogen fertilizer prices, that is a value of between $60 and $100 per year in direct nutrient replacement, discarded at the curb every single week. The term for this practice has a name in the turf management industry. It is called grass cycling, and it is not a fringe idea promoted by composting enthusiasts. It is standard agronomic guidance supported by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the University of California Cooperative Extension, the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and virtually every major land-grant university turf science program in the country. The EPA formally recommends grass cycling as a component of its municipal solid waste reduction strategy, noting that lawn and garden waste accounts for approximately 13% of the total municipal solid waste stream in the United States. That is more than 32 million tons of material sent to landfill or composting facilities every year, the majority of which could have been returned to the soil with no additional cost or effort. But nitrogen is only the beginning of the story. When grass clippings decompose on the surface of a lawn, the process is not slow or unsightly, as the bag and dispose industry would have you believe. Fresh clippings, cut to the correct length, break down within 3 to 5 days under typical conditions. This is because grass tissue is composed primarily of simple carbohydrates and water. Unlike wood chips or straw, it contains very little lignin, the complex polymer that makes woody material resistant to decomposition. Microorganisms in healthy soil colonize fresh clippings within hours. The decomposition is rapid, clean, and, critically, feeds the soil food web that your lawn depends on. The soil food web is the network of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and arthropods that inhabit the top several inches of healthy soil. This is not a secondary consideration in lawn management. It is the engine. Nitrogen applied as a synthetic fertilizer is immediately water-soluble. It enters the soil, is taken up by the root system, stimulates growth, and is gone. There is no residual biological benefit. No structure is built. No carbon is added. The soil biology receives nothing. Over time, Repeated synthetic fertilizer applications without organic matter inputs actively degrade soil health. By shifting bacterial communities away from the diverse, fungal-dominated soil food webs that characterize naturally healthy grassland, and toward the simpler, nitrogen-dependent bacterial communities that require continued synthetic input to maintain productivity. This is the fertilizer treadmill. It is not an accident. It is a business model. Grass cycling interrupts that treadmill at its foundation. When clippings decompose, they do not merely release nitrogen. They feed bacteria, which are consumed by protozoa, which release nitrogen in plant-available form through their excretion. This is called the microbial loop, and it is the mechanism by which natural grasslands have sustained themselves, without synthetic inputs for geological timescales. Beyond nitrogen, decomposing clippings add carbon to the soil, increasing organic matter content. Research from the University of California Riverside found that lawns managed with consistent grass cycling for 3 years showed measurable increases in soil organic matter content compared to lawns where clippings were bagged and removed. Soil organic matter is the most important indicator of long-term soil health. It improves water retention, reduces compaction, increases microbial diversity, and reduces the lawn's dependence on synthetic inputs over time. In other words, the longer you practice grass cycling, the less fertilizer your lawn requires to maintain the same level of performance. Now here is where the industry narrative collapses entirely. The most common objection to leaving clippings on a lawn is thatch. Homeowners are told, and many sincerely believe, that leaving clippings contributes to thatch buildup, that layer of dead organic matter that sits at the soil surface and causes drainage problems, disease, and the compacted, spongy feel of a poorly managed lawn. This belief is so widespread that it has functioned as the primary marketing justification for bagging mowers, lawn vacuums, and dethatching services for decades. It is also, according to the agronomic literature, false. Thatch is composed primarily of stems, roots, and crowns, the woody, lignin-rich structural parts of the grass plant that decompose slowly. Fresh grass clippings, which are soft, water-rich leaf tissue, decompose so rapidly that they do not have time to accumulate in the thatch layer before they are gone. The University of Connecticut Extension states this directly. Grass clippings do not cause thatch. Research from Purdue University's Department of Agronomy confirms it. The thatch problem is caused not by returning clippings, but by overfertilization with synthetic nitrogen, which stimulates growth faster than the microbial community can decompose the plant material being produced. The very product sold as the solution to thatch is, in the right conditions, the cause of it. But there is a right way and a wrong way to do this. The single most important variable in effective grass cycling is cut length. The rule that turf scientists universally apply is the 1/3 rule. You should never remove more than 1/3 of the blade length in a single mowing. If your target grass height is 3 inches, you should mow when the grass reaches 4.5 inches. At this cut length, the clippings produced are short enough, typically less than 1 inch in length, to fall through the canopy and contact the soil surface directly. They are invisible within days. If you allow the grass to grow to 6 or 8 inches before mowing and then cut it to 3, the long clippings pile on the surface, block sunlight, and create the matted mess. That justifies every complaint the bagging industry has ever made. The failure mode of grass cycling is not a property of the practice. It is a property of incorrect implementation. Mowing frequency matters as much as cut length. A lawn mowed every 5 to 7 days during active growth, cut to the correct height, and returned to the surface, produces clippings that are agronomically and aesthetically indistinguishable from a freshly vacuumed lawn within a few days of each cut. This is not theoretical. The California Integrated Waste Management Board ran a citywide grass cycling program across multiple municipalities and documented that homeowner complaints about clipping appearance dropped to near zero when the 1/3 rule was consistently observed. The program reduced the volume of green waste sent to municipal composting facilities by an estimated 1 million tons over its first decade. Mower blade sharpness also determines the outcome. A dull blade tears grass tissue rather than cutting it cleanly, producing ragged, brown-tipped clippings that dry slowly, look worse on the surface, and decompose less efficiently because the damaged tissue is less accessible to soil microorganisms. A sharp blade, maintained and replaced or resharpened annually, produces a clean cut, a healthier plant, and clippings that decompose within the expected 3 to 5 day window. And then there is the question of what grass cycling actually saves you. Let's run the numbers honestly. The average American lawn covers approximately 8,000 square feet. The standard fertilizer recommendation for a lawn of that size is approximately 4 to 5 pounds of actual nitrogen per growing season, split across 3 to 4 applications. At current retail prices, a mid-range synthetic fertilizer bag providing 1 pound of actual nitrogen costs between $8 and $14. To meet the full seasonal nitrogen requirement for an 8,000 square foot lawn synthetically costs between $40 and $80 in fertilizer alone, not including the application equipment, the time, or the environmental cost of the product itself. Consistent grass cycling returns approximately 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per growing season, which for an 8,000 square foot lawn equals 8 pounds of actual nitrogen over the season. That exceeds the recommended synthetic fertilization rate. It does not replace the need for phosphorus or potassium supplementation in depleted soils, but on any lawn where these nutrients are already at adequate levels, as confirmed by a soil test, grass cycling provides the nitrogen requirement at a cost of exactly $0. The fertilizer budget is eliminated, not reduced, eliminated. And what the fertilizer industry does not advertise is the downstream cost of the product they are selling. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, when applied to a lawn in excess of plant uptake capacity, does not stay in the root zone. It leaches. It enters the groundwater system, flows into storm drains, and eventually reaches streams, rivers, and coastal waters, where it drives algal bloom events that deplete oxygen and devastate aquatic ecosystems. The EPA estimates that lawn fertilizer runoff is a significant contributor to nitrogen loading in watersheds across the country, including the Chesapeake Bay, the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, and the Florida coastal systems. The consumer pays once at the garden center and once more, invisibly, through the ecological cost. That is externalized onto the water system. Grass cycling has no runoff. The nitrogen is mineralized slowly, in the root zone, by biology, and taken up in the same biological cycle in which it is released. There is one additional output from your mower that the fertilizer equation rarely includes: water. Grass tissue is 80% water. When clippings are returned to the soil surface, that water is also returned. As the clippings begin to decompose, they release moisture at the soil surface during the driest part of the day, reducing evaporation stress at the crown of the plant. Research from Texas A&M showed that lawns managed with grass cycling required measurably less supplemental irrigation during periods of drought stress than comparable lawns where clippings were removed. This is not a large effect, but in a southern climate where water bills during summer can rival electricity costs, it is a real one. So why, if all of this is documented, supported by every major university extension, and endorsed by the EPA, does the majority of the American lawn care industry still operate on the bag and dispose model? The answer is the same one that explains why Persian wind towers were replaced by electric fans, why passive cooling was abandoned for compressors, and why self-sufficient building techniques continue to be sidelined by a construction industry built on recurring costs. There is no revenue in a practice that requires you to do less. You cannot sell someone a subscription to leaving their clippings on the lawn. You cannot build a distribution network around the recommendation to stop buying something. The $47 billion lawn care industry is not in the business of helping your soil feed itself. It is in the business of making you dependent on the next product in the sequence. The fertilizer that compensates for the nutrients you removed, the thatch treatment that addresses the problem the over-fertilization created, and the overseeding program for the lawn that has been degraded by decades of synthetic dependency and depleted soil biology. The grass cycling practice disrupts every link in that chain simultaneously. Here is what the implementation looks like in practice. If you are starting from scratch with an existing lawn that has been managed conventionally for years, expect a transition period of 1 to 2 growing seasons before the soil biology fully adapts to the organic matter input. During this period, you may notice that the lawn looks marginally thinner than you are used to. This is the soil food web recalibrating. Do not panic and return to synthetic fertilizer. Run a soil test through your local cooperative extension office, typically available for between $15 and $30, and address any documented phosphorus or potassium deficiencies with a targeted organic amendment if required. Allow the nitrogen to come from the clippings. Calibrate your mowing schedule to the 1/3 rule without exception. This is the only discipline the system requires. Sharpen or replace your mower blade at least once per growing season, ideally twice. If you have a bagging mower and do not want to purchase a dedicated mulching mower, most standard side discharge mowers return clippings adequately when operated at the correct cut height. Dedicated mulching blades, which cost between $15 and $40 and fit most standard mowers, chop clippings more finely and speed decomposition, but they are not strictly necessary if the 1/3 rule is observed. Over 2 to 3 growing seasons, the results the agronomic literature predicts are real and measurable. Soil organic matter increases. The lawn's water retention improves. The input dependency decreases. And the annual cost of maintaining a healthy stand of grass, not counting the mower itself, approaches zero. This is a 3,000-year-old principle of nutrient cycling. It is how every grassland on Earth has sustained itself in the absence of human interference. It requires no new equipment, no special knowledge, no subscription, and no trip to the garden center. It requires only that you stop throwing it away. A lot of what this channel covers works exactly as claimed and was set aside not because it failed, but because the industry found a more profitable replacement. If recovering that kind of knowledge matters to you, subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure it keeps being found.